In the last video, you might remember that we quoted Anne Ferretti. She was the head of the largest abortion provider in Great Britain. Here's what she said. "We can accept that the embryo is a living thing in the fact that it has a beating heart, that it has its own genetic system within it. It clearly is human in the sense that it is not observable, and we can recognize that it is a human life of a sort. But the point really is not when does human life begin, but when does it really begin to matter." Now, it seems really calloused and cruel to say that any innocent human life really doesn't matter. Those of us that believe that all humans are created in God's image really can't relate to that statement. In fact, we might argue that anyone who would make such a statement needs the help of a mental health professional. Can they really be so hardened as to disregard human life, anyone's human life? Now, I think the only way they can make such a statement and relate to the rest of humankind is to deny that the unborn baby has personhood or is really a person. Now, they can agree with the science that human life begins at conception, but the baby really isn't a person until it is breathing air and is born. That any human being can be denied personhood is just plain wrong. Hi, I'm Chuck Livermore, a Christian author and speaker. In this video, I want to show you that the unborn are not only human beings, but they are also persons just like the rest of us. Now, in history, you may realize that denying the personhood of any human being has always resulted in it becoming morally repugnant. Discrimination against the unborn is simply the latest example of that in human history. In order to convince someone that all human beings are also human persons, and as such, they cannot be discriminated against and killed with impunity, we will teach you a discussion tactic called the S.L.E.D test. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the S.L.E.D test, let's talk about logical arguments in general. This is a bust of Socrates in the Louvre Museum in Paris. He developed a way of expressing his ideas as logical deductive arguments, or syllogisms. A syllogism makes two or more points or premises that appear factual and reaches a conclusion from these premises. Here's a common example that illustrates how this works. The first premise is all men are mortal. The second premise is Socrates is a man. So from the first two premises, we can conclude that Socrates is mortal. In order for the conclusion to be correct, the premises must be true. If there were men who were immortal, or if one could show that Socrates was something that wasn't a man, the conclusion would be invalid. In order to make the case for the immorality of abortion, we will use a similar logical deductive argument. This is our first premise. It is immoral to kill an innocent human being. Now, almost everyone will agree with this statement. And this is our second premise. Abortion kills an innocent human being. So if anyone accepts our two premises are true, then they should understand that the conclusion is valid. Therefore, abortion is immoral. Now, if someone doesn't accept the first premise that killing an innocent human being is immoral, they don't need a good argument. They need a good therapist. Of course, killing innocence is always wrong. So if they have a problem with the argument, they'll likely contend with the second premise that abortion kills an innocent human being. First, they will try to argue that an unborn baby is not really a human being. Now, I answered that question in the previous video in this series with an explanation from the science of embryology. I'll put a link to that in the description below this video. Now, the argument that unborn babies are not really human, if that argument fails, they'll try to put an unborn baby in some sort of special class of human beings. They'll say that unborn babies may be human beings, but they're not really human persons. They will argue that it's all right to kill this kind of human being. Now, this is dangerous thinking. Now, this is the kind of thinking that people use to justify kidnapping and selling Africans as chattel slaves. Currently, the acts committed against Africans in the 18th and 19th century are unquestionably evil, and they're a national disgrace. But people of that era justified their cruel actions because blacks were considered an inferior class of human beings whose freedoms in life didn't warrant the type of rights afforded to the rest of us. They were being told that Charles Darwin had shown that Africans were less evolved than the rest of us. They were a species closer to their ape ancestors than others. As such, they could be trapped like animals and purchased by wealthy landowners to do work for them like a plow mule or a horse that pulled their wagons. Now, likewise, Adolf Hitler convinced the German population that Jews were a special type of human beings that was subject to the superior Aryan-descended Germans. As such, they could be imprisoned, their wealth confiscated, and they and their families could be killed. Their bodies were burned to hide the criminal acts of these soldiers. This is the same kind of dangerous thinking that is currently being used to justify the killing of unborn babies. As Americans, we pride ourselves in that we defend the rights of the weaker minorities. We speak up for the downtrodden, the defenseless, the outcast. These innocent human beings, who should be the most protected members of our population, are being sacrificed. The abortion advocates say that the unborn are a subhuman class that doesn't need the same right to life with which the rest of us are privileged. Almost always, abortion right adherents will use one of four excuses to justify their position. You can use the S.L.E.D test to learn the best rebuttals to these excuses and have an answer ready when these discriminatory justifications are used. Now, often those who kill the unborn will use the size of the unborn to justify their murderous acts. They point out that a zygote in the first hours of life can only be observed with a microscope. Now, the baby will grow quickly, but it starts off very small. However, we don't discount the value of someone based on their size in other circumstances. So, why is it valid to devalue the unborn because of their size? Most children are smaller than their parents, but we wouldn't consider them less valuable. You would reject the idea that your younger children are less valuable and don't matter as much as your older children. And women are just as valuable as men, even though they tend to be smaller than men. If it is wrong to discriminate against other small people, it is wrong to discriminate against the unborn for this reason. The L in the S.L.E.D acronym stands for level of development. Now, abortion advocates will argue that the unborn baby's developmental stage allows mothers to take the baby's life. What they fail to acknowledge is that humans are constantly developing over the course of their life. We move through different stages of our lives, from infant to child to teenager to adult and finally to elder. But we can't say that our life or the lives of others are any more valuable just because of the stage of their development. We should consistently affirm the value of all humans at whatever level of development, including those developing in the womb. The third way abortionists and their supporters try to discriminate is the environment of the fetus in the womb. They argue that since the fetus is not viable outside the womb, a mother should be allowed to rid herself of it and refuse to be the incubator for the baby. But again, this argument shouldn't apply only to babies. Scuba divers are in an environment that they couldn't survive in without their scuba equipment. Astronauts couldn't survive in space without their spacesuits. We can't discriminate against the unborn babies just because they require a special environment for their survival. A final way that abortion supporters use to justify their actions towards the unborn is because the unborn baby is dependent on the mother. This is the D in the S.L.E.D acronym. A baby is dependent on its mother for its survival, but there's other dependent relationships, like conjoined twins are dependent on each other. And often someone with a disability or the elderly will be dependent on a spouse or someone else to care for them. So the facts are that the same reasons that keep us from prejudicial treatment and discrimination of people who are already born exist for the unborn too. We can't kill an unborn baby just like we can't kill a human being that's already been born. Only a barbaric and uncivilized society thinks that they can. Over the past 5 videos in this series, I've given you the rhetorical tools that you'll need to answer the questions about the pro-life position. In the next video, I want to go a little more in depth with questions that may be a little more difficult to answer. Now, if you found this video helpful, I'd appreciate it if you'd like the video, give it a thumbs up, and also if you want to see more content like this in the future, please subscribe to this channel. And if you'd like to discuss this or any of the other topics from this video series, please leave a comment in the comment section below and I'll get back to you with a reply. Thank you for watching, and may you always be ready to give an answer for your hope in Jesus Christ.